and welcome back to the Raj and Drew Show for Entrepreneurs. And we are continuing with this series of the stages of growth and the emotional intelligence required in each stage. It was a great episode last week, Raj, when we started about that stage one. And now we're jumping right into stage two, where we're in the ramp up phase. And tell me once again, how many employees do we have during the ramp up phase? Generally,
you are between 11 and 19 employees, Drew.
11 and 19 employees. And the reason I asked that, if you're not familiar with the stages of growth, the dynamic that shifts the organization the most is going to be how many employees you have. So as you grow, as you get more people on your team, that is going to have a bigger impact on how you as the entrepreneur leader need to lead your organization. And so as we talk about ramp up stage, there are three key emotional intelligence competencies that you've got to have during this stage. And the three competencies are empathy, emotional self-awareness, and achievement orientation. And I'm going to read the definitions of those, Raj, and then we'll jump right in. So on emotional self-awareness, the definition of that is recognizing and understanding one's own emotions.
Yes.
So just understanding your own emotions.
Exactly.
And then on achievement orientation, it's striving for personal and professional improvement. And then on empathy, we talked about this in the last episode, it's understanding and sharing the feelings of others. And so just so I'm clear on this, Raj, and I want to make sure all the listeners are clear, we're talking about the emotional intelligence competencies that the entrepreneur, the leader of this organization, the founder, the CEO, the president, whatever title you're taking, you're running this ship.
Yes.
Or as the sign in my office says, I'm the captain of this shipwreck, right?
Exactly.
You're leading this thing. And so these are the competencies that you need to acquire, and they're competencies, meaning that they can be learned. You might not have them naturally, you might not be strong in them naturally, but they can be learned. So we talked about the competencies there. Do you want to add anything to those definitions, Raj?
No, you covered that very, very well. I just want to talk about why it is important.
Okay, yes.
Because when you're ramping up, when we are in a stage one company, it is question of survival. Do you think the new enterprise, will it survive or not?
Yeah.
But by the time we come to stage two, we are not thinking about survival anymore. We are still thinking about growth, because we have gone past there. The product and services have been validated. There are few customers. We are making money. We are making profits and stuff. We hired more than 10 people. So all of that has stabilized a little bit.
Yeah.
But still we want to. And what happens now is the communication becomes very, very critical, because when you have 5 people, 8 people, it's easy for everybody to talk to everybody. But once you get to the 15 to 20 people, the critical piece of it is you don't have the founder, the entrepreneur doesn't have the time to talk to everybody. So for them to grow, they generally, this is a stage, they need to hire 2 or 3 very good people and develop them as future leaders.
Okay.
And now what happens here is that is where the empathy comes. That is where the motivation comes. That is where the emotional intelligence piece of it comes, because they're working and communicating through these 2 or 3 people.
Okay. Okay. So they're leveraging themselves at this point.
Exactly.
And their time. And really where we see this applied is in sales. We see it in that employee development, developing them into leaders. Yes. And then creating that effective communication and goal setting mechanism within your organization, so that you aren't the one that has to push everything to the finish line at this point. Exactly. You hopefully have some people helping you move things to the finish line. So when it comes to sales and selling daily and driving growth, how do you utilize emotional self-awareness to manage sales-related stress and challenges?
So if you go back and look at it, each one of us is very unique, and we have our own personality, our own psychometric profile, and how we sell. So they have to be aware of, hey, this is the way I am selling.
Yeah.
But when I have Drew next to me, or Chris next to me, or Diana next to me, we need to understand and say, what is their self-awareness and what is their style of.
Okay.
You can't go back and say, hey, do ABC, and then you'll get the result.
Yeah.
That has worked with me because I know my profile very well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reason why they need to be aware of who they are. And then the second piece of it is basically not rubbing that on everybody else.
Okay.
That becomes very critical. I'll give you one example. There was a small engineering company, and the CEO was a very, very smart, brilliant guy. This was an engineering company. And there is something called ENR 500 or Engineer 500. And his whole vision, he worked for 20 years building his business, and his goal was to be in the 500, recognized as the top 500 engineering companies in the country. But because he was so small, he never took the time to go back and work with everybody else. So he had 8 very good leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So what one of the things as his coach said was, hey, we're doing the strategic planning piece of it. What I want you to do is you come up with your strategy in the office. I will take your 8 people. I will spend a day and a half in an external hotel, which was opposite his office. And then we meet on Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. All 8 of them will present their strategies. And you listen to them. If you like them, continue. If you don't like them, you present your strategy like every year you do and tell them to follow. He was very, very resistant to it because of the coach, and he had to try something new. He understood himself. And the great news was, at that time, if I remember the numbers right, basically his strategy was to make it a $24 million company from 19 million, 5 million extra. That was his plan. But when everybody presented, the numbers came to close to $28 million.
Wow.
And then he said, Raj, let us go and celebrate. And I said, I thought you wanted to present and stuff. He said, no. They're giving me 4 million more than I planned for. I don't need to do that.
I love it.
And that is where his self-awareness of saying there is one way of doing it. And because we had that interaction and I could help him to think through that, his company grew. And 3 years later, they were part of the Engine 500 and everybody. They're one of the fastest growing engineering companies in the country.
That's fantastic. Well, and it goes to recognize it's the old idea, know thyself, right? The first step is to know thyself and know what your strengths are, know what your challenge areas are, know what you're good at, and then understand that that's your unique process. But you can't lead people where you haven't been, right? You can't give what you don't have. And so it's so important to take the time to think through those, put it on pen and paper. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? Get an assessment. You have a fantastic assessment that you use, Raj, to help people determine that. Get the assessment so you can understand your strengths, but then you can also recognize the challenge areas, and you can maybe bring on people that can shore up your weaknesses and excel where you don't excel, so that you can have a well-rounded sales team.
Exactly. And as an entrepreneur, this is where it comes. You are, as an entrepreneur, if you look at all the people who are very successful in scaling the business, they have one thing in common. They learn, they know when to unlearn and then relearn a new skill. And that is exactly what happened. What they were doing in a stage 1, telling people, getting things done by communicating with them, has changed. So they need to unlearn that and relearn here, saying, okay, this is my strength. This is the way I do it. So I should let somebody else who is motivated hire the person who is very, very highly motivated and let them work their way. And I will be there to manage, coach, mentor, and train them. Rather than telling them to do the exact same way we do.
Absolutely. That's so good. And it's really what it's about is the whole idea of if you don't like the results you're getting, then change something. Change your philosophy, I know my wife and we've done that in our personal life, right? And you go, hey, we didn't get the result we were looking for. Maybe we need to change our education. Maybe we need to change how we view our finances, right? We need to change a dynamic, and you have to modify your approach. You have to always be learning and changing your approach. That's great. Now, what are some strategies for cultivating? We talked about achievement orientation. And
Yes.
so we want our team to be self-starters. We want them to be driven. We want them to be motivated. How have you seen it work out, or maybe an example of strategies for cultivating that achievement orientation within our organization?
So one of the biggest part of it is what gets measured gets done. So this is a stage. Now they have a couple of people to delegate and everything else. So they take the business goals and start divvying up and saying who is responsible for what and by them. That would be the first piece of it. Take the business goals, basically the people goals, whatever goals they have. I always recommend 3 to 5 goals, not more than that.
Okay.
And once you have that, then each one of them needs to go back and say, how are we going to measure this? And who is the owner for it? So one of the best practice I have seen is sometimes they go back and say, okay, Raj and Drew, both of you are responsible for it. Whenever we have a joint ownership, that doesn't work as well. The reason is, okay, Raj is working or Drew is working. So I always insist, and the best practice is one person owns it.
One owner, yeah.
Yes, if Drew is owning it, Raj can be the supporter for it. Or if Raj is owning it, Drew can be the supporter for it. But somebody should be the ultimate owner and say, hey, whatever happens, I am holding you responsible.
Yeah.
That clarity of the ownership and the clarity of the measurement. Those two things are very, very important.
That's good. That's good. I love it. Well, let's shift over to developing these employee leaders. So how do you identify potential employee leaders from an emotional intelligence standpoint?
So if you go back and look at it from the biggest part of it is basically who is very, very self-aware, because they need to be self-aware of people.
Yeah.
When you have the self-awareness and you can go back and review within yourself and do an accurate self-assessment. So you are aware. So you understand yourself very, very well. And once you understand yourself, you can go back and look at it and say, I can do a very, very objective assessment instead of saying I can do everything.
So you're saying the founder leader needs to first, like we talked about, do the self-awareness check, make sure that they, and not only that, but emotional self-awareness, you as the leader, you got to get better at managing your emotions. If you're always flying off the handle, and I just heard a story about Steve Jobs, which was not, he was known for kind of being a jerk sometimes.
Yes.
But I heard another story about him that he owned some property out behind Stanford, and he would go out there and he would scream at the top of his lungs in the middle of the mountains to try to relieve stress, relieve pressure off of himself, so that he didn't do that in the organization, right? Everybody, you got to know yourself. You got to know the things that you have to do to blow off some steam while not incurring damage to your organization. You don't want those screaming moments to happen with a great team member and it forces them to leave because you cannot control yourself.
Yes. So if you go back and look at it, Drew, in your example, Steve Jobs, one, he was very well aware of what his strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
Two, he had a very, very accurate self-assessment. And then based on the gaps he has identified. So for him, one of the weakness was, you know what, basically I'm aware of it, but maybe I cannot control it very well. So I need to come up with a way of it. So that's the reason why he bought the land or whatever it is behind Stanford. And he said, you know what, I'm going to be in the nature and do what I need to do to get my stress.
Yeah.
So that's a great way for you to look at it. Every entrepreneur needs to start understanding that.
Yeah, that's good.
So for me, I'll tell you one thing, when I am really, really frustrated piece of it, even at home, I'm outside, wherever I am, I tell people, guys, please do not disturb me for the next 60 to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
For me, I like to completely calm down and isolate myself from everything.
Yeah.
And that is what I focused on. So I don't even answer phone calls. I don't do my email. I don't do anything else. For 60 to 90 minutes, I'm just shutting off everything.
Yeah. I had an entrepreneur mentor that he told me, he said, sometimes the best thing you can do is call it a day.
Call it a day.
Right? Because you don't want that collateral damage.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need to just separate yourself. Oh, I missed a call. Well, is it bad that I missed a call from a client, or that I give a bad experience to a client? Or is it bad, worse that I miss a call from a team member and don't answer a question, or that I yell at them because I'm frustrated right now? It's better just to miss the call and do what you got to do to get there. So yeah, know thyself. I love that. So the first step, we're talking about identifying leaders in the organization. You're saying that first step is make sure you're self-aware and you got yourself in check. So what's the next step when we're trying to identify these potential leaders?
So the first piece of it, you want to go back and look at it. How are they managing themselves? So I
Okay.
look at it from critical piece of it again, awareness piece of it, self-assessment, and the third piece of it, their motivation levels.
Okay.
Because in this page, like we discussed about, in a startup kind of a thing, the motivation piece of it plays a very big role in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
Because they don't have systems, they don't have processes, everybody is learning, and they're drinking by the fire hose, lack of a better term. And in a situation like that, the motivation plays a very big role. So we need to look at it from that point of view. And when you're looking at motivation, I always go back and look at least two things. What is the discretionary energy they are spending towards solving a problem or getting things done?
Okay.
That is one of the motivation. The second piece of it, I always look at it, is their curiosity. Because you will have a lot of challenges, and the people who are more motivated, they are always curious and they keep on asking and digging to see what exactly is happening and what can we learn from it.
Yeah.
So once the owner or the entrepreneur starts identifying these things, then he can slowly start taking chances.
Yeah. So let's back up for a minute, because you said identify the discretionary energy that an employee is putting towards problem solving. Now, let's define discretionary energy so that all the listeners understand. This is a concept, just like, hopefully we all have some discretionary income. That means a little extra money at the end of the month that isn't going to savings, isn't going to pay bills, that you can use to go out to eat, you can use to go to a baseball game, go to a movie, whatever you want. It's extra. Yes. Well, every one of your employees has this extra amount of energy that they can choose where they want to put it. And if they're bought into the organization, they're going to use that extra bit of time, that extra bit of thinking energy towards your organization and problem solving. That's what you're saying, is identify who's using their discretionary energy towards the benefit of the organization.
Yes. So I'll give you one example from the automotive plant I worked a few years ago.
Okay.
So basically, automotive, they're always just in time, and you can't ship more than 8 hours worth of product ahead of time. So we had a problem, and the machines would have been stopped for about 6 hours if the packet was not reaching them at certain time.
Yeah.
And the delivery for FedEx and everything else was done, so nobody was picking it up.
Yeah.
So one of the supervisors, without anybody's permission, anything, he took that, put the parts in his car, and just drove 4 hours to go back and personally deliver it. That is what I call discretionary energy. He just drove. Nobody asked him, nothing. He said, you know what? I don't want my company to be delinquent. I don't want my plant manager and their manager get into a fight and discussion and all of those things. I said, we still have 6 hours to deliver. I will drive 4 hours. I will be there. He went, he personally delivered and came back. That is what I call about that.
Wow. That is ownership right there.
Exactly.
That's great. Okay, so let's
just fast forward. Basically, because of all of that, he rose to the level of a plant manager in a few years. I have seen him grow all the way through. Yes.
Yeah. So how do we use emotional intelligence to create kind of KPIs, these key performance indicators within an organization, and understanding the value of data-driven decision making?
So when you have the measurement piece of it, data-driven is very easy.
Okay.
The emotional intelligence piece of it is more of the touch and feely kind of a thing sometimes. So you need to be constantly checking with each other and saying and seeing how they're coming and what is happening.
Yeah.
An example can be is basically after a team meeting. Let us say there was a lot of discussion back and forth. There were some tough problems to be solved. Some might have got a little more excited than the others and stuff. But before they break, are we doing a quick emotional intelligence check and say, is everybody okay or not? Are they still feeling frustration? Is anybody having any other thoughts on that? So giving them time to go back and bring them back to normalcy.
Mm.
understanding them. If somebody has a passion and their ideas were not heard, then basically giving them an opportunity to be heard and express their viewpoint. A
Yeah.
lot of those things. So within that, once the meeting has ended, you want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with, from an emotional point of view before they leave. That is
Yeah.
one of the things you can do.
Yeah, because it's interesting, and I've been working with an organization that is very much data driven, and as long as the numbers are right, it's like everything's okay and everything's right, as far as we're meeting our KPIs. How do you have you had success or worked with a company that was highly data driven, that you were able to help them understand the value of emotional intelligence and
Yes.
the like you said, the touchy-feely side of making sure everybody's on board?
So I'll give you a simple mathematical equation. I call it a change equation, but it fits very well with emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Most of the time, if you look at a technical solution, you talk about an automotive problem or any problem, we have brilliant minds who
Yes.
come up with a solution. So they come out of it. So let us say they are basically 100 points, 10 points for that on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, it is a pretty bad technical solution versus 10 being the outstanding technical
Okay.
solution. Let us say you give a 9 on it.
It's a great solution.
9 solution, yes. But the second piece of that equation for effectiveness of the solution is the people have to adapt it. People have to use it, right? If you have a technical solution and you implement it and nobody's following, there is no result.
Yeah.
So if you look at the adaption piece of it, and there is a 10, if there is only adaption of 3 out of 10, then 9 times 3, your effectiveness score is only 27 out of 100.
Mm.
But if you go back and take the same thing and say, instead of 3, I put a 7 there. Now your effectiveness has gone to 63.
Yeah.
And that people piece of it is all through the emotional intelligence piece of it.
Yeah.
I mean, seatbelts is a great example. I tell people is initially when they were going back and they implemented a lot of strict rules around seatbelt.
Mm-hmm.
But if everybody goes back, every car has a very good seatbelt. But if nobody is using it, what is the effectiveness of the solution?
Yeah.
Right? It is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But once you got the people and you're communicating with them and making sure they understand the safety and everything else, then the effectiveness of it is very, very good. I would say in the last 20 years, since the seatbelts have become a must, thousands of lives must have been saved, if not
Absolutely.
millions.
Yeah.
And that is the piece of it. So the emotional intelligence piece of it plays that role, which touches the human piece from adaptation, from following the rules, making sure they're very, very comfortable with what is being changed.
Yeah. That's so good. That's a great way of expressing it. And I think a very data-driven person could hear that equation and go, okay, there's value there. And they probably experienced a 9 or 10 solution to a problem that only got a 10 or 20% increase out of 100, because there just was no effort put in to communicate the message, make sure everybody was on board, give time for adoption and change. And so that's a fantastic way of communicating that. So speaking of communication, let's jump into effective communication and direction. We're in this ramp up stage. We've got 11 to 19 employees. What does emotional intelligence, what's the role that emotional intelligence plays in this effective communication and direction? How important is that? How much time should the founder, entrepreneur, leader, how much time should they spend on effective communication and direction?
I would go back and say there is no part of it like a hard, fast rule, but whatever it takes to make sure everybody is on the same page. For some people, when the culture is good, it might require only maybe an hour once a week.
Okay.
Where the culture is very, very different and they're still growing and fast moving and fast changing, then they need to spend more time.
Yeah.
See, it's a very, very difficult question to say X number of minutes or X number of hours.
Mm-hmm.
But the leader, the entrepreneur, and the 2 or 3 of the supervisors or the leaders he has picked, all 4 of them has to be emotionally aware. And each one of them is always looking for the awareness and spending the time appropriately based on what they're seeing and what is required.
Gotcha. So
And
empathy would come into play during this part as well, because you're talking about reading your team, read the room, understand where other people are at, if they're bought in or if they're just um, if they're saying yes with their mouth, but they're really got a stiff arm or they're resisting you on the inside. You've got to be able to read that and understand that. And that's where that empathy is going to come into play.
Yes, empathy, and some people call it even what they call is social awareness.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the self-awareness first. Now you're talking about social awareness. Self-awareness is all internal to us. Social awareness, empathy is all about the external being.
Yeah.
And that can be going back between different leaders, and how they manage that becomes very, very critical there.
That's great. That's great. Okay. How do we, we're wrapping this thing up. How do we drive teams to hit their goals, and how does that factor into this ramp up stage in growth? And then also, where does emotional intelligence play a part in driving teams to hit the goal?
So if you go back and look at the companies in stage 2, some companies are growing much faster than the others.
Okay.
So the magnitude and the speed of growth will determine the magnitude of emotional intelligence required. If these people are really growing very, very fast, so change is happening on a regular basis, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
In a situation like that, the awareness piece of it has to be very, very high, and everybody should need to have a pulse on that. If they're a little more stable and they take a little more systematic way of adding people, and they have time on their side, the time requirement and the energy around that will be a little bit lower.
Yeah.
And this, basically the founder has to be aware of it. And especially because they're moving some of the responsibility and delegating it to the other people, so they can have the time to go back and manage this. That is what because Raj, where do I have the time? The entrepreneurs always keep talking about it. And if they delegate it, they are getting some time out of it. And they take that time to go back and work on the emotional intelligence side.
Now, you said something interesting. You said some of these companies are growing very fast in the ramp up stage and some not as fast. I think everybody listening is asking the question, how do I become one of the companies that's growing very fast, Raj? Tell us the secret to success.
Just being very, very aggressive in your growth targets. Delegation piece. See, if you look at all the stage 2 companies who are growing faster, they have upfront, they have identified 1 or 2 people who are very, very good and complement their skills very well.
Okay.
That is the biggest piece of it, I tell people is. And then they're working on the visionary piece, the entrepreneur, where the tactical execution piece can be taken care of with these 2 people.
Okay.
That is one of the biggest thing that comes to the surface. And I have observed in companies who are growing much faster than their counterparts or peers.
So be the visionary person that's leading your team, but have a couple, maybe 2 people that are helping you execute and get results. Find those people as early as you can and get them on board. And that's going to help you and pay dividends in this ramp up stage in stage 2 is what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. That's powerful. That is powerful stuff. So we covered a lot of ground. We talked about sales. We talked about developing your team. We talked about KPIs. We talked about, hitting these goals within your team. And so the skills, once again, needed in this ramp up stage are the achievement orientation. You want to make sure that you embody those skills of highly motivated, and that you're attracting other people that are highly motivated. You're trying to identify the people on your team that are giving their discretionary output. They're passing that on, just like this great story you told of the person that decided, throw it in my truck, I'm going to drive it to the client, right? They took ownership. They were all in. You want to identify these people, pour into those people, compensate those people well, and keep them on your team. Anything else? Any final thoughts or encouragements for the listeners before we go on this stage 2 ramp up phase of an emotional intelligence?
I would go back to the sentence I made a comment is learning, unlearning, and relearning. That is the key for the entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's so good, because in every stage, it's going to be a little bit different. There's going to be some things that are the same, but you're going to have to modify your approach throughout that process. And if you're moving really fast and you're growing very fast, that change, that learn, unlearn, relearn is going to happen even faster. So that's powerful. That is some great wisdom. Raj, thank you so much for sharing that information with us today. And any new trainings or courses that the listeners could participate in, any programs that you can share with them before we go?
So basically, the Entrepreneur Growth Alliance, we are launching that in the month of September. It's going to be a very, very exciting time because we are bringing in about 10 to 15 stage 2, stage 3 companies together, and we are giving them a toolkit over a span of 12 weeks to really help them to go and scale their business anywhere from 30, 40, 50, 60%, depending on where their goals and where their vision is.
That's fantastic. Wow. Okay. So perfect timing. If you are in that stage 2, 11 to 19 employees, stage 3 is the 20 to 35, is it?
Yes.
Okay. 20 to 35 employees. So if you have between 11 to 35 employees, there's an opportunity for growth for you coming up in the fall of 2023. And if you want to reach out to Raj though, and you want to put together your own training for your organization, he can do that as well. And this is powerful stuff. You'll get in-depth training on these stages that we're talking about today, and be prepared for that learn, unlearn, relearn process, and really have a guide that can guide you through those various processes. So that's fantastic, Raj. With that, thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and I hope you got value from it. I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Drew. All the best, everybody.